welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and the consequences for those choices. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.
Now is Republican Vice Presidential nominee JD Vance, who represents Ohio in the U.S. Senate. Thank you for being here, sir. So the mayor of Springfield, Ohio, Rob Rue, said, quote, all these federal politicians that have negatively spun our city, they need to know they're hurting our city. And it was their words that did it. Before Donald Trump talked about eating dogs and cats on a debate stage, it was you, Senator, who first elevated this baseless rumor. These are your constituents. So why are you putting them at risk by continuing to spread claims about Haitian immigrants, despite officials in your state saying that there's no evidence and pleading for you to stop?
Well, Dana, first of all, what's putting the residents of Springfield at risk, which was a town completely ignored by the American media until Donald Trump and I started surfacing some of these concerns, is that they can't afford housing, they can't afford health care. The schools have been overwhelmed.
And welcome again to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the formula. I did think it's interesting that this particular interview kind of surfaced after the other interview, which was a few weeks prior. You're going to see a marked difference between the way Dana Bash handled Harris and her VP and the way she handles JD throughout this. A couple things I want to point out about her statements at the very beginning. First of all, she's saying allegedly, and which I thought was very interesting since there is evidence, and you're going to hear that at some point. The other thing is that she says that she's quoting the mayor, and she says, that Donald Trump and JD, they did it. But they did what? They brought attention to it. They brought negative attention to it. She doesn't specifically say. And the reason why I bring this up is because as we get into the interview, and especially towards the end, JD confronts this particular lie. And actually, he does it even sooner. And he's just like, this is disgusting what you are implying. So pretty fascinating. You're going to see a couple of other things, too, that I want you to keep an eye out for. And that is that she keeps interrupting, which is something she didn't do with the Harris interview.
Ask, why have I talked about some of the things that I've been talking about? Let me just say this. My constituents have brought approximately a dozen separate concerns to me. 10 of them are verifiable and confirmable, and a couple of them I talk about because my constituents are telling me firsthand that they're seeing these things. So I have two options, Dana. I can ignore them, which is what the American media has done for years to this community, or I can actually talk about what people are telling me.
Okay, so Vance immediately is laying out the case for the fact that his constituents are the ones that brought him this information and these stories. It is eyewitness testimony. Now, if you know anything about going to court and all the other stuff, certainly you have seen dramas, TVs, movies, all that kind of stuff. If a witness to something is useless, then don't bring it up. Don't ever bring witnesses to court. But that's not how it works. So if people are bringing him information and they're talking about something that's of concern to them, well, that is not a baseless claim. That's people coming to him and saying, "Hey, we got a problem and we need to deal with it."
Dana.
Senator, I have to go through several things that you just said. First of all, the Clark County Sheriff and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources reviewed 11 months of 911 calls. They only identified 2 instances of people alleging Haitians were taking geese out of parks. They found 0 evidence to substantiate those claims. Also, other evidence that you have talked about, even you've retweeted alleged evidence, are unsourced social media videos from a different city, apparently no connection to Haitians. And this is from a conservative activist who offered a $5,000 reward for such things. And then going just backly to the schools and the hospitals and so forth being overwhelmed, nobody is disputing that the town of Springfield, Ohio, needs help. But you're not just a bystander, you're the senator from Ohio. So instead of saying things that are wrong and actually causing the hospitals, the schools, the government buildings to be evacuated because of bomb threats, because of the cats and dogs thing, why not actually be constructive in helping to better integrate them into the community? Because there are a lot of employers there who say that the Haitian workers are helping fill jobs that they need desperately filled.
Okay, so a couple things I want to point out. One is that she keeps saying allegedly, which I think is very interesting. And she uses, the baseless claims type of thing. She also mentioned about bomb threats. Now, I think it's very interesting that in her first statement, when she was quoting the mayor, she never said anything about bomb threats. So he's basically saying, they're the ones that did it. But there's no way to know what he means by they did it. They brought, a shining light to this situation? Or are you insinuating that they are the ones that caused these people to send bomb threats? And we'll talk about that in a minute as we get through this. But then the other thing is that, did you notice in the one sentence, like towards the latter part of that, right before we ended, says that, that these are unsourced. Okay, we've already talked about that. They're not unsourced because these people brought information to him. So that's a source. And that, saying that these things are wrong, why not be constructive? It's like, okay, so now you're no longer a journalist. Now you're just an editorialist. Because why are you inserting yourself into the story by sitting there making a subjective comment of why not be constructive? So clearly you've made a judgment already prior to coming into this interview. Why? Because you wrote that question down. You decided that that was something you were going to ask, and you've decided that you're going to go ahead and push him on that particular situation. Well, you're no longer unbiased. So JD, he's a pretty smart guy. So, he's able to pick up on this, which I think is, always amazing when people are able to catch it. I was talking to friends today that the reason why JD is so good at that is because he's in the moment. He's paying attention and he's listening. He didn't come there with an agenda, or if he did, it's not known. But it is interesting that every time she makes an accusation, he's able to speak to it, and he doesn't let her get away with it. At one point, you're going to see she wants to move on. It's like, no, we're not moving on. We're not moving on because this needs to be addressed. You're making accusations about me that are simply untrue, right?
Dana, first of all, let me just respond to a couple of things that you said, but I want to start with something you said, which I think is frankly disgusting and is more appropriate for a Democratic propagandist than it is for an American journalist. There is nothing that I have said that has led to threats against these hospitals. These hospitals, the bomb threats and so forth, it's disgusting. The violence is disgusting. We condemn it. We condemn all violence.
Senator,
and
this
threats
happened
of violence.
after you and
But
President Trump were on the debate stage, said that cats and dogs were being eaten.
You asked a question, Dana, and I'm going to go ahead and answer it. What we have said is that this town has suffered terribly under the policies of Kamala Harris. Now, you just accused me of inciting violence against the community when all that I've done is surface the complaints of my constituents, people who are suffering because of Kamala Harris's policies. Are we not allowed to talk about these problems because some psychopaths are threatening violence? We can condemn the violence on the one hand, but also talk about the terrible consequences of Kamala Harris's open border on the other hand. Now, let me just fact check a couple of other things that you said, Dana, because it's important. You said that all of these migrants are in the country legally. They are in the country through what's called temporary protective status.
Right.
That is when Kamala Harris waved a magic amnesty wand, taking people and giving them legal status. That is not to say that they're here legally. That is a terrible indictment of her amnesty policies that have further opened the border and further caused terrible migration into this country.
You might not agree with the policy, and obviously you don't, which is totally fair and legitimate. There are policy disagreements all the time. But the fact is, it is the law because
No,
President
Dana,
Biden
the point
and
is,
Vice
Dana,
President Harris are. But I don't want to, frankly, go down this conversation about policy
Dana,
because
you made a point. You don't. I agree. You don't want to talk about policy.
No,
Dana,
what
which
I
is
want
why
to
you're
talk
talking
about,
instead of about the fact
Senator,
that Kamala
it was
Harris,
your
Dana,
distraction.
granted amnesty
You were the
at
one
a
who
mass
started
level.
talking
She
about
granted
eating
amnesty
dogs
at a
and
mass
cats.
level.
You were the one who
Dana,
brought this
my
up.
constituents
The president
were the
said
ones
it to
who talked about
60
eating
million
dog and
people.
cats, and I talked about it because you were ignoring this community.
Okay, so some of these are going to run a little long just because in the context of what they're saying, you don't want to interrupt it. But did you notice, of course you did, you can't help it, that she keeps interrupting him while he is mid-sentence when he is actually providing information for people to bring comprehension to themselves regarding whatever this particular situation is. So, I mean, you can't really ignore that piece of what she's doing. And then, she's going back and forth with, you're the one that brought this up. You're the one, Donald Trump mentioned it. And then you could see he's a little exasperated towards the end of that particular segment. And he's like, Dana, my constituents are the ones that brought this to me. And then you notice how he did speak about the fact that she's sitting there, she's basically insinuating that he has, incited violence because these people there were bomb threats. Now, if you haven't followed up on this with the news, just know that the governor, Mike DeWine, came out, and one of the things that he said was that all of the bomb threats, and I think there were over 30 of them, all of the bomb threats were hoaxes, and quite a few of them were actually from out of the country. So here's another portion of this, is that Dana, whatever the hell her name is, she is not doing her homework. Not as a journalist, not following up, not even as a host, because she should have waited until she had more information, but she didn't. Which I think is so interesting, is that instead she wanted to go on the attack and she wanted to go after Vance for what she considered that he's responsible for the violence that's going on there because he decided to amplify the story about the cats and dogs being eaten that President Trump had mentioned in his debate.
My constituents talked about it.
Have you been
it is
to
my
Springfield?
responsibility to surface their concerns when the American media
Have you been
ignores
to Springfield?
Dana, I've been to Springfield probably 100 times in my life.
How about
I've taken my
recently,
children
since
to
you've
get
heard
ice
this?
cream at Young's Jersey Dairy.
Have you heard recently since you've gotten these calls?
Have I been in the last 4 days?
No,
I'm
I'm
talking
talking
about in
about
the last 4 days, but I've
since
talked
you've
to a lot
gotten
of
these
people
calls
in
from the
Springfield, Dana,
constituents.
and they're telling me this stuff is happening.
Okay, so immediately you can hear the accusatory nature of her questions, and again, interrupting him. She does not seem to be able to help herself from that. And what's interesting is he is still pushing back, but you can still see he's just like a little annoyed, or, he's just at least, he's kind of having, some expression, some animation in the way he's talking because she's an idiot.
Dana, would you like to ask me questions and then let me answer them, or would you like to debate me on these topics? I noticed that when you had Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, you gave them multiple choice answers to the questions that you asked, and you allowed them to answer the questions. I'm happy to be here to talk about policy, but if you're going to interrupt me every single time that I open my mouth, then why am I even doing this? So please ask a question, and I'd ask you to be polite enough to let me answer it.
Yes, I am, and I think that if Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were making unsubstantiated claims that had racist undertones about people eating dogs and cats, and they didn't answer the questions about that, then I would have similar interactions with them. As you know, I am very grateful that you come on the show, as I am for other Republicans. But this is something that you're hearing from constituents. I did a lot of reporting. I talked to people in Ohio over the weekend, and they're really worried about these claims. The policies, yes, I am agreeing with you that what I heard is that there is concern that these migrants. There's a lot of them, and the integration isn't being done fast enough and well enough. And that's a totally legitimate conversation. But there are other conversations that are happening. Aiden Clark, who is an 11-year-old boy who was killed in Springfield last year. It was a car accident involving a Haitian immigrant. You said that he was murdered. His father said that's not true. It was an accident. Here's what he said to you.
So this is one of the spots in this particular interview that went viral. And what is it that made it go viral? The fact that somebody was pushing back at the media and they were calling it out. They were speaking to the reality that you keep interrupting me and you don't allow me to finish answering the question. And he's just like, I'm happy to do this debate, but if you're not going to let me finish, then why am I here? It was just beautifully stated. And then her making the insinuation, if Walz and Harris had made unsubstantiated claims, again, she is not acknowledging what he has already told her, which is his constituents are the ones who brought him this information. They are witness to the situation. They are bringing substantial question to what is going on in Springfield, which I think was really amazing. And so she makes the comment about the unsubstantiated, then follows it up with racist undertones. And I think, wow, what an interesting... and she just kind of slides it in there, hoping he's not going to pay attention to it. Or, the next thing you know, she's going to be, oh, we just want to move on. Like, yeah, we're not going to move on from you. Not at all, Wicked Witch. And then finally, the last part of that is the piece where she starts to go off the rails and she wants to go on to something else. And again, this is a technique and a tactic that, people on television do, is that they no longer want to talk about the subject because they're being challenged on it. So they want to bring something else up and they want to try to deflect and distract. But what's great is he's having none of it.
Senator, he's asking for you to apologize. Will you?
Dana, first of all, my heart goes out to the Clark family, and I don't bring their son's name up because they've clearly expressed a preference for politicians to not bring their son's name up.
This is one of those tactics that I don't know when this became popular, and I don't know why media thinks that it is their job. Somehow they're the guardian of all these, woke things and trying to get people to apologize for things. He's asked you to apologize, will you? I was like, if I was Vance, I would have said, whatever I'm going to do with, whoever this guy is really none of your business. So why don't you just move on? Because no one put you in charge of trying to mediate between myself and this other individual.
Just once and for all, you again started this in part by saying that, which Donald Trump repeated on the debate stage, and he didn't say anything about the policies that you're talking about. He just said, Haitians are eating dogs and cats. Can you affirmatively say now that that is a rumor that has no basis with evidence?
Dana, the evidence is the first-hand account of my constituents who are telling me that this happened. And by the way, I've been trying to talk about the problems in Springfield for months, and the American media ignored it. There was a congressional hearing just last week of angel moms who lost children because Kamala Harris let criminal migrants into this country who then murdered their children. The American media totally ignored this stuff until Donald Trump and I started talking about cat memes. If I have to,
but it wasn't just a meme,
create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do, Dana, because you guys are completely letting Kamala Harris coast. You had one interview with her. You talk about pushing back against me, Dana. You didn't push back against the fact that she cast the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which is why a lot of Americans can't afford food and housing.
You just said that you're creating a story.
Public policy.
Sir, you just said that you're creating the story.
What's that, Dana?
You just said that this is a story that you created. So the eating dogs and cats thing is not.
We are creating. Dana. It comes from firsthand accounts from my constituents. I say that we're creating a story, meaning we're creating the American media focusing on it. I didn't create 20,000 illegal migrants coming into Springfield thanks to Kamala Harris's policies. Her policies did that, but yes, we created the actual focus that allowed the American media to talk about this story and the suffering caused by Kamala Harris's policies.
Do you condemn the Proud Boys, even if it's just 12, even if it's just one marching in Springfield?
So it sounds like Dana is seeing herself as some sort of a lawyer cross-examining the witness and, wanting him to fess up to whatever, is in her head. Now, you probably saw it, and I would encourage you to go back and watch it again, but the minute he said something about creating the story, because later on he defines it, that if we need to focus on that by letting people know what's going on, which creates a story, which creates, a story for the media to, investigate, then he's going to do it. But she couldn't wait. She couldn't wait to get it out of her mouth. Oh, so you're creating this story? So then it's not, and she just wants, so it's not real. She really wants to go down that road. Again, it's so subtle. It is so manipulative. And then she goes down this other road where she, again, wants to sit there and say that these are baseless claims. And you see the frustration on his face is like, Dana, these are claims from my constituents. It's like, and it would have been good if he had said, I'm sorry, do you not think that eyewitness testimony means anything? I mean, why do you ever do stories then, on the scene of something if you don't think an eyewitness testimony means anything? And again, because he answered the question and she can't get out of it, she immediately deflects, and now she wants to talk about the Proud Boys. It's like, oh my Lord, oh my Lanta. It's like this woman cannot stay focused, which I think is so interesting, but it shows you that she's not in the moment. She's just wanting to cross-examine what she considers the witness. She wants him, she's got an agenda. She wants him to admit to something. She wants him to apologize for something. She wants him to be more constructive. You see how this is going and going and going.
You've heard a lot of the media focusing on every possible distraction from the story in Springfield. You've heard them focus on these Proud Boys marches. You've heard just in this interview, Dana, the suggestion that because some psychopath is calling it a bomb threat, somehow we have to then ignore 40,000 Springfieldians who are having their lives worsened by Kamala Harris's policies. Well, what is the implication, Dana? I actually love to have this conversation right now live on air.
Right.
What is the implication when you say you calling out these problems has caused a bomb threat? You accused me of causing a bomb threat. Doesn't that mean you should shut up about the residents of Springfield? Don't you realize you're engaged in basic propaganda to silence the concerns of American citizens?
I was quoting the actual mayor of Springfield, Ohio, begging after the bomb threats, begging federal officials, to please stop putting negative attention on his city. And I'm not talking about the policies. I'm not talking about the very real challenges that Springfield has. I'm talking about baseless rumors about Haitians eating dogs and cats. And that, after that was said on a debate stage, that is when these bomb threats started. And that is a fact. Senator, I just want to move on. I have two other quick issues separate from this that I want to talk to you about.
Dana,
go ahead.
Again,
please go ahead.
I think this is actually an important conversation.
Okay.
Look, the Springfield mayor, he's dealing with a lot of terrible things. I certainly sympathize with the guy, and we're going to try to help him out. But he did not accuse me of inciting a bomb threat. He just didn't. And if we're going to take the firsthand accounts of people who are on the ground in Springfield, why don't you bring on some of the people on your program who say that the migrants are eating their pets? You're applying a double standard here. You're saying if one person accuses JD Vance, I'm going to take that person's word as the gospel truth,
you have somebody
even
whose
if you
name
misrepresent it. If you have another person who's saying they're eating the cats, you're going to completely ignore them, attack them, silence them, and harass them. That double standard is why that people don't trust the media and why we're not talking about public policy 51 days out from a presidential election.
One of the things that I think is interesting about this exchange is that when JD starts talking about, you're making implications and everything, and that this is about policy, if you notice, Dana never wants to talk about the policy. She never wants to talk about the reality on the ground, which is, and it is true, the Biden-Harris policy of allowing people to come into this country and to do the things that they're doing, where they flew these people into Springfield, into Ohio, has overwhelmed the system. She never brought it up. She never relinquished the idea of understanding that comprehension of, look, this is what caused all of this stuff. This is what ignited all of these stories. This is what ignited people talking about cat memes and all the rest of that. Because why? Because the constituents of JD Vance had to come to him and say, hey, this is going on in our neighborhood and nobody is doing anything about it. I think it's remarkable that she doesn't want to even own that. She doesn't even want to talk about it. And of course, so she went off on the Proud Boy thing and, she had to make a big deal about that. And she just keeps deflecting. And I just think when you watch her, it's just an interesting tactic that the media wants to do.
Right. If you have somebody you want to tell us about who has proof that somebody ate their cat, of course we want to hear that. We certainly have had no evidence that that is actually something that happened. And I just want to say, I have not accused you of anything. I am quoting the mayor who said, after these bomb threats, federal politicians are negatively spinning our city. They need to know they are hurting our city. It was their words that did it. Okay? That I'm quoting him, and it seems to be a
Dana,
cause and effect.
Roll the tape. You just accused me of inciting a bomb threat. There's no evidence of this. I condemn violence and threats of violence. We should be able to do that and also still talk about what's going on in Springfield.
I'm glad to hear that you condemn it. That is very important. We had a lot of other issues to get to, but I really hope that you do come back so we can talk about other issues. Senator, thank you so much.
So then in that last segment, he's saying, you made this accusation. And she's saying, no, the mayor said blah, 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 blah. Okay, but the mayor does not have any evidence. And I think that's the piece that, and I should have mentioned it previously, but the mayor does not have any evidence that that's what caused these bomb threats. None at all. I mean, if he did, he would have presented it, right? He would have said, hey, I've gotten calls. People have said, hey, these people are, they're making fun of Springfield and we're sick and tired of it. And they're talking about people eating our cats and, there's a bomb that's going to go off. Well, fine. Then that is evidence, right? It's witness testimony that it's evidence. But the mayor insinuated it in the same way that Dana insinuated it, and he called her on it. And she tried to get out of it. She tried to weasel out of it. Oh, no, I wasn't accusing you. I was just telling you what the mayor said. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, we get you. We understand what's going on. But you are trying to accuse him. And, to JD's credit, I got to say, over and over again, the guy, he does not, he doesn't care. He gives zero Fs about all of that. And he's going to call people out on it. Okay, so what does all of this have to do with listening to this podcast, setting the standard, iconic freedom, accountability, responsibility? When I do these interview the interviewer, what I am enjoying about this, and I hope that you're getting something from it as well, is that this is how people in your everyday life interact with you. Something happens in life, there's an exchange that goes on at work, somewhere with family, somewhere when you're out in public, who knows, and this is how they play the game. They try to incite things. They try to make baseless claims like she did, saying that, oh, so-and-so said this. And he's like, no, they did not. That is not what he said. But what they want to do is they want to gaslight you, and they want to distract you, and they want to create a deflection. So then what happens to you? So if you're a person that is not in control and command of your own emotions, but you let it get the better of you, well, then you're going to start trying to respond to everything because, you're like trying to put fires out. It's just like, spray it over here, spray the water over here, spray it over here. And the whole thing gets distracted when you start arguing and, that kind of back and forth with people. This is what happens, and it escalates mainly because you've been gaslit. So when you're able to, if you're able to stay in the moment when you're talking to people, you start to have that little, moment of, this doesn't feel really good. In that moment, don't worry about it not feeling good. Let that be an indicator to you, oh, this is my spidey sense. I need to call on my spidey sense to come forthwith and help me to decipher what is actually going on here. What distraction is this person trying to pull with me? What are they trying to get me to pay attention to and not pay attention to? We go towards something or we go away from it. So what is this person trying to move me towards and move me away from? And when you start to decipher those conversations, after a while, this becomes a skill that you're going to be really glad you developed. Because then when people start going in these directions, you're just going to be able to deflect it and, move on from it, because it's like, listen, we're not talking about this. That's not what this is about. You want to make it about this, and that is not what's going on here. So here's what I need to do. And in concrete specifically, you lay it out for them. And it's a great way to manage these types of situations that will occur in your life. I guarantee it. The nice thing is if you're in the moment, then you really can speak to it. And when people contradict themselves, and when they lie, and when they try to distract you, you can call them out on it. Not a big deal, but it's not trying to tell them off. It's just saying, hey, I noticed what you're doing here, and you know what? That's not going to work. And even saying it that way is really a nice way of calling them up on the carpet about it. So, alrighty, well, that music means that we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Hey, listen, hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know how it might help them in their journey as well. If you're interested in subscribing, you can do that too. And my book and all that kind of fun stuff is down below. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for. Have a great weekend.